Hey guys, it's the third Wednesday of May of 2016, and that means it's time for another episode of Commander on a Budget. This month we are doing Rasputin Dreamweaver. He won a poll on my Twitter, and I've decided to stop just doing it on Twitter so that more people can vote. So if you stay tuned to the end of this video, I'll tell you how to vote on what next month's Commander on a Budget should be. But this month's is Rasputin Dreamweaver. He's unique, as you can see, as a large block of text, and he's very old card frame. So he's a 6-mana 4/1, and he enters the battlefield with 7 dream counters on him. And each of those dream counters can be removed to add colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can remove one to prevent the next one damage that would be dealt to him. On top of that, if he's untapped at the beginning of your upkeep, he gets another dream counter, but he can't get more than 7 dream counters. So the reason he's unique, in addition to just having a weird block of text, is he's a ramp commander who's not green, and I think that makes him fun and interesting. And what this deck tries to do is take advantage of his ability at producing mana and run with it, play huge spells, and so forth. So I have things, as usual, divided into various areas. We can talk about the lands real quickly. Mostly these are budget lands. This is Commander on a Budget. Blighted Cataract's nice because it draws us lands. We have a bunch of cheap lands that add 2 colors. We always want Evolving Wilds. We have a couple man lands because this deck is a little low on creatures, so having some presence. Hollowed Fountain is definitely our most expensive land. Moorland Haunt is just a nice little utility land, although this deck doesn't have tons of creatures, so it's not always going to do stuff. Reliquary Tower, I think, is important because this deck can draw tons of cards. And so is Riptide Laboratory because it can save him and also make sure after you've used up some of his dream counters that he gets all 7 back. And then the rest are just, basically nondescript lands that produce more than 1 color. So each of these piles are different things. This pile is mana rocks. This deck runs a lot of them because it wants to produce a lot of mana, both from Rasputin and otherwise. This pile is basically staples for a blue-white deck, and some of them are especially good for this, and I'll talk about why. This pile is stuff we want to do with a massive amount of mana, and this pile is stuff that blinks our commander, and I'll talk more about that in a second. First, we'll talk about the mana rocks. We've got Everflowing Chalice, which works well with Rasputin and works well before him, because you can make it produce a ton of mana. We've got Soul Ring, as always. Mana Vault, as always. Felwar Stone, as basically always. Cold Steel Heart, not always, but sure. Thought Vessel, another card that makes us have no maximum hand size and produces colorless. Worn Power Stone, a pretty big staple. Chromatic Lantern. Basalt Monolith. Azorius Key Rune, which is nice because it gives us another creature if we need one. Thran Dynamo, and Gilded Lotus. So those are our mana rocks. Here we'll talk about the staples real quick. You always want Path to Exile in your white decks. Can deal with any creature. Same with Swords to Plowshares. Cyclonic Rift, another great staple that you should invest in because it's pretty cheap. Disenchant, Jace Beleren, one of the very cheapest planeswalkers, and quite good in any deck that's blue. Trinket Mage is good because it can search us up any of these 3 mana rocks. Treasure Mage is good because it can search us up stuff like Conduit of Ruin, and a few other things like Duplicant, which we have here. Oblivion Ring is a good removal spell that you usually want. Same with Banishing Light. Ojutai's Command isn't as good in this deck as it is in most, but still countering a creature spell and drawing a card still seems good. We don't have any 2-drop creatures, so it doesn't really get to grab any of them. Clever Impersonator is another great card. It continues to go up in price, I think largely because of the fact that people are running it in Commander. It's great for Commander, and you should get one if you don't have one already. Tidings, doesn't say here because it's a promo, but it draws you 3 cards. Tragic Arrogance, another good cheap wrath effect that I think you usually want to run. It's nice because we can keep our Rasputin alive and blow up most other things. Duplicant is pretty great in any commander deck, and it works well in this one too because you can play Rasputin and Duplicant in the same turn because he can produce 7 mana. Phyrexian Rebirth, a strong wrath effect. Elspeth Sun's Champion, a very good commander, destroys, of course it does destroy Rasputin, but she can also protect you forever. Austere Command is great. We don't usually want to blow up artifacts, but the other stuff sometimes we do. Eternal Dragon's a great staple. Also something we can do with a bunch of mana if we have to win with them. Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time are both things that we love. So now we get to sort of the more fun part. What this deck tries to do that most other blue-white decks don't, and that is it tries to ramp. We have all these rocks, and we have Rasputin, so we want to play lots of crazy big spells, which you can see here. So we play Void Winnower, 9 mana. is amazing because sometimes it just turns off all the cards in your opponent's hand and makes all their creatures unable to block. Usually it's going to have some impact on the board and on your opponent's hand, even if it doesn't turn off everything. Artisan of Kozilek is great because it lets us return a monster from our graveyard to the battlefield if we have to. Also has Annihilator. Grozoth is great because it lets us search our library for a bunch of our creatures. These are all 9s, for example, and just put them into our hand and just start cranking them out there. It itself can also be a win condition if it has to be, and I can also transmute it if I'd rather not have to cast him to get hold of Artisan of Kozilek or Inkwell Leviathan, which is our next card. Very difficult to deal with. It has Shroud. It's massive. It's easy to play with Rasputin. Kozilek, the Great Distortion, same, another creature that we really want. Draws us a huge number of cards, and then we can counter our opponent's spells if we need to. And then also the original Kozilek, who doesn't draw us quite as many cards, but he does have Annihilator 4. Orochi Hatchery, this deck can produce infinite mana or get close, and so all X spells are good, and Orochi Hatchery is one of them that once we get it in play, if our opponent doesn't blow it up, we just win with a bunch of snakes. Brain Geyser, we can either use this to draw ourselves a bunch of cards or to mill our opponent if we have infinite mana. Decree of Justice is sweet because we can either put a ton of angels into play or cycle it and pay X to put a bunch of soldiers into play. Quarantine Field, we can sometimes use to, exile 6 or 7 permanents. White Sun Zenith is nice because it's an instant. We can just cast it on the end of our opponent's turn and sometimes just win. Martial Coup is a sweet wrath effect that also acts as a win condition, so I think it's a very crucial card for this deck because it can blow up the opponent's board while also giving you a ton of soldiers. Secure the Waste. This is, I think, weirdly the most expensive card in the deck. I made this deck a long time ago, and Secure the Waste was not expensive then. It's gone up. You can probably replace Secure the Wastes, but it is a good card, another instant that can just win you the game on the spot. Distorting Wake is a way to either, use a bunch of mana to disrupt my opponent, or I can use it to balance all their non-land permanents and sometimes just win that way. Blue Sun Zenith is another way to mill my opponent or draw a bunch of cards. Myojin of Seeing Wind gives me a creature that can draw me a million cards. Stormtide Leviathan can just win the game on its own. Phyrexian Ingester is kind of a staple in blue, I almost feel like, in Commander, and it can exile any creature. It's like Duplicant, but one more, and it gets even bigger. Diluvian Primordial is great because I can steal my opponent's best instant or sorcery from their graveyard for free. Quicksilver Gargantuan's great because I can have it enter as a copy of, anything, except it's a 7/7. Conduit of Ruin's a key card for the deck because it can search our library for a lot of stuff and make them even cheaper. Rite of Replication, we can use this to copy a really good creature of ours, and then if we have a ton of mana, which we do sometimes with Rasputin, we can make another copy. Capsize is one of the lamer ways this deck can win, and I often just have people scoop, but you can eventually just get to the point where you can capsize like 3 times at the end of your opponent's turn. So I mentioned having infinite mana or a ton of mana numerous times, and over here is how we can make massive amounts of it. Especially Eldrazi Displacer. This gives us an infinite mana combo because Rasputin enters the battlefield with 7 counters. You can add all 7 to your mana pool, use 3 of it to exile him, and just keep bringing him back until you have infinite mana. I could make the deck around simply getting both of these and getting the infinite mana combo, but I don't really aim to make a combo commander deck. I think that people prefer that you don't do that for the most part, especially when it's just a 2-card combo, although I guess I need something to play. But if it happens, it happens, Deadeye Navigator doesn't give me infinite mana, but it does give me a ton of mana. I get 7 mana every time, and as long as I have 1 blue, I can keep exiling Rasputin. Momentary Blink only lets me do it a couple times in 1 turn, but that can still give me a huge amount of mana. And Flicker Form lets me make sure I have 7 counters on Rasputin every turn, and also protects him. So that is the deck. It just tries to, ramp out crazy big threats. It can produce infinite mana sometimes, and it's a pretty fun deck to play. So that's the deck. Now I will show you guys how to select next month's commanders. So these are the 2 choices for next month's commanders. I'll either use Mistform Ultimus, who's every creature type, or Reiki, the History of Kamigawa, who is cool because he's sort of like the most commandery of commanders because he wants your whole deck to be filled with legends. So these are the 2 choices. You can just simply post a comment on this video putting which one you want, and your vote will be counted that way in determining which of these 2 commanders I use, so enjoy voting. I'll also, of course, now play 3 matches with the Rasputin, or 3 games, rather, with the Rasputin Dreamweaver deck. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.